All right, part two. In this second part of the lecture for this week, we're looking at technology, and in some ways I'm surprised we still talk about this, but in other ways it's not surprising at all. There's been debates about using technology in curriculum for many years, and even still in parts, even recently in New South Wales, they still weren't that keen on students using a calculator in the classroom. Still arguing about calculators is interesting because really these days calculators are almost obsolete because we don't have to have specialist calculators. Often people have an iPad or a laptop of some sort which they carry around, which have all got obviously a calculator built into it, but also a range of other mathematical tools that do the grunt work of mathematics really. And indeed, someone said to me, what happens if you don't have a calculator with it? You need to work it out, how to do things. Well, the truth is these days almost no one doesn't have a calculator with them because everyone carries their phone and every phone's got a calculator in it. But anyway, there's still debates about technology, and I think for you as you go through your career, the question's not should I use technology, particularly ICT, but more about what's the appropriate way and how can I get the most out of it. How has it changed what mathematics is like? So we'll look a little bit about how we can teach mathematics and numeracy with technology, some things to consider, some of the challenges, and how we can use it to promote deeper knowledge and understanding. So again, there's another link there for you to follow. But in essence, what we know now is that the technology that's available today, and of course this will change over the years, and if you're 20 now, you've got 40, 45 years of teaching left in you. Who knows what technology will be used in 10 years, let alone in 40 years. So you're always going to have to deal with this. This is something you're always going to have to cope with, or we can talk about what's available to now. But we know that it makes a whole range of knowledge available, which has great potential for learning. So some questions you need to think about when you're teaching is, well, when you're planning, what am I using the technology for? What actual work is it doing for me in terms of the kids' learning? How does it help? This is something you need to think really careful about, otherwise you'll just do it off the cuff, or it might be just a random decision. Right now there might be some times when you don't want them to use some of the technology, or you might use it in particular ways, but it does have to be planned for. You do need to think about what style of learning and teaching is appropriate. How will the calculator or the ICT help? Sometimes it helps because they can see things. If you're doing graphs or things like that, they can often very quickly draw it even with an Excel spreadsheet or something, and they can see it much more quickly than spending a long time laboriously drawing it. So if the purpose is to be able to draw the graph, you might want them to laboriously draw it and plot the points, but if you want them to see a particular pattern, then maybe the technology helps them see it more quickly. It also helps you talk about mathematics in different ways, where you can ask them to reflect on things and give more critical thinking. It lets you use more realistic data. So without technology, you have to make sure that all the calculations are fairly simple. Because if you're discussing another concept, let's say measurement concept, you need to make sure all the numbers are relatively easy so the students are not spending all their cognitive labour doing the arithmetic. They can actually focus on the measurement concept. But if you've got some sort of technology, the actual arithmetic calculations can be done easily, therefore not distracting their cognitive labour away from the concept at hand. And it can be used to promote critical thinking. They can see representations quickly, they can compare things, etc. It doesn't do the justifying and the explaining for them, but it presents the information or shows it in different ways and helps with what I'd call the donkey work of mathematics. Sorry, there's no answer here about when to use it. These are questions you need to think about and decide upon each time you're going through a different part of the curriculum. I think that YouTube clip's quite useful in helping you think about those things. And again, you probably can't see this diagram, the text is quite small, but it's some of the considerations you need to undertake when teaching with technology. And let's face it, you'll always be teaching with technology. So starting from the inside and working out, you can have a look at that later on. So what are some of the issues you might face when you're trying to use and incorporate technology in meaningful ways in your maths and numeracy teaching? Well, to be honest, at the moment, still one of the biggest problems is the agility and the resilience of staff being able to cope with change. You will go into a class, and maybe not for you, but particularly sometimes for older teachers, but it will happen to you as you get older as well. The kids know more about the technology than you do. So sometimes you can be quite fearful about the change, and you can try and control things and keep things out so it's within your realm of expertise. And so learning to teach and use something that you may know less about than your students is a challenge. Also, secondly, it's still a problem in some places having access to the resources and the infrastructure and the technology. In schools, still the most popular person is often the technician who looks after all the technology in the school, because the internet drops out, the apps don't work, someone's done something on their iPad and it's not connecting as expected. There's a whole range of things, and we still have these ongoing technical issues. But more importantly than that is, in some places the internet's not stable. So if you've got resources that are reliant on being connected to the internet, in some places the internet is not viable all the time. And still we have a number of schools in poorer and disadvantaged areas where kids may not have the technology. So we can't just expect that all kids have a laptop or an iPad and a phone that they at home and at school. Sometimes they don't. And that's an equity issue which schools will deal with in different ways. But again, it affects your teaching. If you've got a class of kids where they've all got computers and laptops and iPads at home compared to one where they haven't, then the way you teach and use them will be different. Even if you've got them at school, if they haven't got them at home, they'll obviously be less familiar and au fait with them. So you need to continue to see the value of technologies in the curriculum and in your pedagogy and in your assessment. An assessment's a tricky one because often we'll let the kids use it to learn and then as part of the curriculum, but then when we get to the assessment we take it away in case they're sort of cheating or something like that. Now, when we're using technology, the context of use will need to be considered. One of the things it does, it helps us utilise authentic learning experiences. So we don't have to be, as we mentioned just before, we don't have to make sure that the numbers are nice and tidy when we're doing calculations, for example. We can use real context with real data. Again, hopefully what it does is links home and school, because technology increasingly is becoming used seamlessly across the two, and so as a learning, not just as a learning platform, but as tools and resources that are available for kids in both places, albeit taking into account the issues we talked about before with school kids in disadvantaged areas. The good thing about technology is that it's seen as relating to the present. The problem we have with that, of course, is that what's technological savvy now and useful now probably won't be in 3 or 4 years' time. And so the point here is not just to teach them to use the technology now, but helping them to use the technology in a meaningful way so they can continue to learn about technology and how it would help them in their numeracy and their mathematics. It gives other ways of doing teamwork and collaborating, and it can relate the curriculum with the assessment. Some of the things that are related to this is about, of course, ethical behaviour and citizenship for students. And we know from a range of different contexts and places that we have issues now with bullying and ethical behaviour and things like that that didn't exist years ago simply because technology enables it. And this is not lost in the mathematics, teaching mathematics as well. So if the kids are all on devices in your mathematics class, even simple things like they can interact with ways that are somewhat more secretive than in the past, when at least they had to write a note on a piece of paper and hand it across. And also the access to all sorts of online content and behaviour which isn't appropriate for them. So this is not news to you. There's a whole pile of issues around ethics that need to be considered, and helping kids to be critically aware of this and in a way that's appropriate at school is part of your job in maths as it is in any other subject. Also, how to engage with the technology but not see it as a magic box that gives you all the answer. So sometimes what happens when we have technology available is it just becomes, that is all the mathematics. We just rely everything on the technology. Now we know that technology can do some things, but it can't do everything. So if you find the students can do almost everything in class on technology, then you're probably spending too much time doing just mathematical procedures to mathematical solutions, which we talked about in the previous lecture, first part of this lecture series for week 6. But things that technology can't always do is take a real life type problem and model it into a mathematical problem, or take the mathematical answer and then translate it back into a real life answer. So there's much more capacity to do that, and they are skills that kids have to learn, and they won't just get it because they've got the technology to do the calculation part. Now, again, I'm not sure if you've heard about prompting and fading before. It doesn't really matter if you remember the terms. But a prompt is just something when a student's working on something and you give them a prompt. You don't tell them the answer, you give them a little question, or you ask them to think about something, or you point them somewhere. A prompt, I think it's a common word that most of us will understand. And technology can be useful for that. It can be a useful way of helping them see something that they may not have seen before, so as part of your prompt. And fading is like the opposite, the systematic reduction of a prompt until it's no longer needed. So when kids are doing something, you might give them a prompt, then after a while, the idea is you don't have to give them the prompt. That becomes part of their automatic thinking around that. So if you think about this example, this might help you understand it. When the kids are telling the time, what are the prompts that you would use? How would you help them understand the time? And then what are some of the things you would want to remove? What prompts would you remove as you're doing it? How could this be done with technology, for example? And by technology, it could be as simple as a clock. So again, there's a teacher-generated video link there, and I hope you have a chance to look at it. This is not a professional one. This is done by a teacher. See what you think. What parts of it did you like? Do you see the use of these videos as useful? Because of course you'll be aware of probably Eddie Wu and other people who make all sorts of videos for their classes. The best ones I've seen are by a guy called Joel Speranza, who is up in Brisbane. They're all about senior secondary maths, but he makes these videos for his kids in his class, but he also makes them widely available on his website and his YouTube channel. But sometimes would it be useful for you to make videos for your students? What's the advantage of it? You can see at uni we've been moved to making these videos for your lectures. You don't all come and sit in a big lecture theatre anymore. And in doing so, the advantage for you may be that you could go back and look at something again if you want to. I'm sure probably all of you look at these videos several times just for entertainment on a Friday night. But the disadvantage of it is we don't have any engagement anymore. I can ask you questions, but I can't hear your responses. You only have to go away and follow up things. So what are the affordances of these sorts of things? How can you prompt and then fade out? And that example from a primary school teacher might be useful for you. So here's some of the prompts you might have picked up from the video. If you haven't looked at it, well, I'm sort of telling the answers a little bit. But you'll see that pointing to the hands as well as the voice. Okay, so the technology is not just ICT, but also, in this case, a clock. Use of non-verbal indicators, the use of colour, linking telling the time with the analog clock to tell time with the digital clock, putting them side by side so they can see it. Here's another example from numeracy, or not numeracy, sorry, number. So a student might know how to count objects but not have numerical recognition. So you can see there's some of the steps you might do. You might put things around so they can see them, some objects. And then as you go along, the apples could, in this case, could fade away if you're using apples or pictures of apples. And there's lots of programs that do that online. If you've had Kevin Larkin for any of these things, he's involved in a very large research project called ELSA, which is about developing numeracy in the early years, involving apps mostly. So there's the example there. All right, lastly, I'm going to just go through some arguments for calculator use. Calculators, I still think, have a little place in the classroom, not as much as it used to because we have a range of other things. And as you progress in your teaching career, I'm sure you'll probably never see them except in the museum. But the advantage of a calculator is it's still available to be used fairly efficiently in and around the classroom, and they give you a quick response. They're simple. They don't have all the other stuff. You don't have to decide what to do because you've got all the bits and pieces there. The beauty of a calculator is it doesn't make the decisions. You have to do this, well, at least in this case, the students have to do the thinking. It just does the crunching for you. It doesn't do the maths, it just does the number crunching that helps you think about the other concepts that might be important at the time. And there's some examples there. And if you want, there's another video. So the benefits of using technology. We'll finish up with this. Before I go through these benefits, the main thing is you probably don't have any choice. All right, so back in the dark ages, like 5 years ago, we were still discussing whether we should use technology. Now it's everywhere, so it's not worth, the debate about whether it's available in there is largely gone. And even for students who may not have much at home, the resources are there at school at least. But using technology brings concepts to life in the sense that they can be much more realistic and much more lifelike than just artificial context we make up so the numbers are simple to use. Technology enables us to really easily connect ideas together. So for example, in Excel is an easy one. You can connect a table and a graph and a formula all together seamlessly, whereas if you did it by hand, it would take you a week just to draw the three things and to map it all out to see them. Very quickly you can see these things side by side, and then you can do the more important mathematical work of trying to see how these things are related to one another and how they can see the connections and the deep mathematical learning. Technology makes it easier to communicate mathematical ideas. So simple things, when we used to do statistics previously, we'd get kids to draw pie graphs. And they had the idea of a pie graph, but it would take them half an hour to draw it and measure the angles. And often they wouldn't get to see the graph because they took so long to measure angles and draw the actual, the pie graph out. Whereas now we can get the graph drawn very quickly using technology, and so they can communicate the ideas and talk about the graph and what it shows and what it doesn't show and where it would be useful and why it's statistically an important thing to have in certain situations and where it's not appropriate, because they're not spending the whole lesson just drawing the graph. Sometimes it can very quickly show students' weaknesses and strengths, particularly in their own thinking. They can do calculations and see if they're miles out, or they can see what they're doing well. In general, the novelty of technology still hasn't seemed to have worn off on students. When we first introduced computers, it was like, wow, how exciting. We're going to take the kids into the computer room for a lesson, and they'd be over the moon just by the fact that they could use a computer. And then it was iPads. I think the kids still like using it, and it can be engaging. Of course, it depends on the apps and programs that you use, but it can be more engaging for students, and it supports teaching. But the important thing here is it doesn't replace you as the teacher. It just does some of the work, and it changes the nature of how and what you teach. So if you see teaching technology as replacing you, and sometimes this happens with programs which can be quite dangerous, like the number one, Mathletics, and those sorts of things, it doesn't replace the teacher. We still need teachers to help kids see the connections, see the mathematics, reason with things, try and develop the mathematical concept and ideas, and develop in their numeracy. So, hopefully this was useful for you. Again, through your career, the changes in technology are going to be phenomenal. So you might as well get used to it and get ready to go with the flow rather than resisting it. This is something you might learn a bit about now, but you're going to be learning about through the rest of your career. So good luck.